That's pretty funny. So we're going to go ahead and start with Concho. Our certified minister's assistant, Yukari Williams, will be ringing for us. And just treat this as a kind of meditation. You can put your hands together in Gasho if you want, or just sit comfortably and listen to the ringing of the bell. So thank you, Yukari. Please proceed. Thanks, Yukari. For those of us who are members here and have this tradition, we're going to go ahead and recite the name of one of the Buddhas, and you're certainly welcome to join in if you'd like. It'll be call and response 3 times at first. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namanda Kamada. Well, first, welcome everybody. I'm really glad to see you here. We have a couple of people who are especially knowledgeable about aspects of Buddhism, so I'll try and make sure we have a good time for questions and answers at the end. I hope to keep this to an hour, so the rest of us later on can go find a cool room to weather the summer. We do have the air conditioning on. The last time I looked, it was down to 77, but I hope it gets lower for your comfort and convenience. The Buddhist Temple of San Diego has kindly allowed the Buddhist Education Committee, the ministers group, to go ahead and share some of the very early teachings of Buddhism. We think this is a good way for folks who are interested in Buddhism and want to learn a little bit more. And it's also good for the rest of us to go ahead and be reminded about the trunk of the beautiful tree from which our particular sect is just a flower on an upper branch. So you will hear things that may not jibe with what you believe about Buddhism, or may not follow what you know to be the official position or the doctrine of our particular tradition, and that's all okay. That's all okay. In fact, one of the themes of our particular sect is come as you are. And that's another way of saying that who you are right now is just right. And regardless of all the burdens you have or the complications you have in your life, it's okay. The Buddhist path always starts right below your feet. And in many ways, Buddhism, although it has a very broad message and is meant for all people, it's taken to heart by individuals who bring their own world of experiences, thoughts, and feelings to work with. And it's our lives that are the true subject matter, if you will, of Buddhist action. Before we may want to undertake good deeds, or the concept of accruing good karma is not a major focus of our tradition. In Mahayana Buddhism in general, you'll often find stanzas in a sutra or in other readings that assign any good karma accrued to all sentient beings. In other words, it's a very non-selfish concept, a way of thinking about who you are and what your progress is. And in some ways, the idea of spiritual progress itself is problematic because even in the Buddha's time, he did not use these terms, but you may be familiar with a term called spiritual materialism, where you start getting proud of all of your ownership of spiritual items. You know, well, I've been to this seminar, or I heard this great teacher, I got to hear the Dalai Lama, I sat at his feet. That's beautiful, that's wonderful, but then if we're focusing on the teachings of the original Buddha, those are attachments. So just set it down and try and understand who you are right now. Because who we are is a very plastic, fluid thing. We like to think that we've always been the same with no change. But if you look back on your life, you may remember being an early child just sort of confused about the world or trying to figure things out. I used to think that that was because the child's brain was slowly developing to make sense of the chaos, and it's exactly the opposite. The child's brain is seeing everything, experiencing everything. It's a deluge of information to try and make sense of. So the Romantic poet said that we trail clouds of glory as we come. The idea being in the Christian idea that we have these heavenly origins and then have to deal with the world. In the Buddhist conception, we are experiencing everything all at once. And it's a practical accommodation that eventually we learn to focus on some things only. Your brain will continue to lose brain cells, but your brain will also make new connections. So I hope we all make new connections today. So I did want to introduce myself. My name is Bill Teague. I'm one of the volunteer minister's assistants here. My wife and I have been grateful to be members since the early 1980s, involved in Dharma school, where you're really having to come up with a good teaching to share with young kids that is authentic and that fits within the world of our tradition. And that was a good introduction for us. And then Joyce and I became further involved. We were both temple presidents at one time on the board of directors, and I've done various bits and pieces of trying to help out the temple. But we have been without a resident minister since the end of 2022. It doesn't seem that long ago. On the one hand, it seems a really long time ago on the other. We are so grateful. Our minister at the time, Reverend Kenji Akahoshi, had a number of practical ways to talk about developing one's sense of being a Buddhist, or to embrace the world in a way that a Buddhist might, that were completely free of school, completely free of doctrine, completely free of any sectarian ideologies. So I hope to share a few of those as well, because I think they are helpful, especially if some of you come to Buddhism cold or just would like to get a kind of fresh way of looking at things if you haven't heard them. So what I'd like to start with is to take advantage of this beautiful spiritual architecture. This temple was built in 1930. The beautiful altar that you see behind me was constructed right after World War II. There had been an arson here that destroyed what was a fairly plain altar, and because of population shifts, we inherited some of these lovely furnishings from two temples in El Centro Buddhist Temple and Brawley Buddhist Temple. So we remain grateful for that, because this really is a fabulous representation of the way temples might have looked in the 1800s. And to some degree, the more modernized look still reflects some of these features. But this would be impossible to replicate today. The craftsmen no longer exist to go ahead and do some of those carvings, for example. You might have 6 carvers working on one of those panels you see up above the altar, 6 months just to go ahead and complete it. They claim, I don't know if it's actual or not, they claim that it's carved from a single piece of wood. If it is, that's especially impressive. I remain a slight skeptic because the carvers were very practical, and if some of you know how the wooden statues of the Buddha are constructed, typically there are people who focus on one element. The body is one element, the pedestal may be another element, the head is one element, and the hands are one element. So they are expert at fitting those together, so that's why I have a little bit of skepticism, but even so, they're quite impressive. So this architecture, even though what we'll call the Gejin, or the area where the public sits, looks very Christianish, in the sense it has pews, we have an organ, we have a piano. The altar itself is very Buddhist. And it has a very, what's the right word, subterranean way of getting you into a spiritual mood. The effect of public architecture is important. And this is a space, this space itself has been around for so many years. Since 1930, generations of living Buddhists have been here seeking peace and calm. And so one of the messages I wanted to share is that as far as the original Buddha was concerned, we have what we need. We already have the capacity for peace and calm, even if we're not feeling particularly peaceful or calm. So this will seem quite rudimentary to many of you, but we may have some new visitors. So I'm just going to ask us all to do a little bit of breathing. So go ahead and just sit in a nice relaxed position. You don't want to slump too much in the chair, but you don't have to sit bolt upright. And just relax, take a deep breath, and then exhale completely. And then breathe in. And breathe in just a teeny bit more than you might normally. You don't have to fill your lungs to bursting, but use them a little bit more, and then exhale again. And just enjoy that sensation. The reason that sitting meditation is so popular is that because it's a physiological response to how you choose to breathe, and it can be effective. We'll get into its spiritual import later, but for right now, let's try that again. A nice inhalation, and then just exhale. And enjoy the peace. So this is available to us at any time. Sometimes we're in environments where it's just not possible. I once visited For a while I was visiting prisoners in the Miramar Consolidated Brig, and very often it's very hard for them to find any peace and calm in those situations, and yet they did find some. And you can see how if that gets extended into a meditation session, that's a beautiful thing too. So later on, we'll talk a little bit more about what this particular sect emphasizes, but the main focus now is on the original teachings of the Buddha. So along those lines, I'm going to have us do a Pali chant, very short. I'm not going to have you look at it in the book. We're going to do it in call and response. Some of you are new, some of you here already know it and probably wouldn't need the book at all. But it's the Vandana, which are the praises of the Buddha, and it's just 3 phrases, a single sentence. And then there are the Tisarana, or the 3 treasures of Buddhism, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. In English, we typically use the Sanskrit terms, but Dhamma, Buddham, Dhammam, Sangham in Pali. So if you're okay with it, let's do this in call and response. I'm just going to ask you to put your hands together in Gasho. Please listen. We're going to do 1 phrase at a time for the Vandana. Namo tassa bhagavato. And repeat with me. Namo tassa bhagavato. Listen. Arahato. Repeat. Arahato. Listen. Samma Sambuddhasa. And repeat. Samma Sambuddhasa. So now I'm going to go ahead and chant the entire sentence and chant it back with you, and I bet you'll get through most of it. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhasa. So join me. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhasa. Pardon for that. And now we're going to do the Tisarana, and I think it's short enough that I can do a line at a time. In Pali, and then we'll do English and Japanese. In Pali, it goes like this. Buddham saranam gacchami. So repeat. Buddham saranam gacchami. And now you know it all really, because the rest of it is going to be changing the first word, and the rest of it remains the same. The tune changes slightly. Dhammam saranam gacchami. Repeat. Dhammam saranam gacchami. And listen. Sangham saranam gacchami. And repeat. Sangham saranam gacchami. Since we're repeating in other languages, we'll move on. The English is pretty easy. I place my faith in Buddha. I place my faith in Buddha. I place my faith in Dharma. I place my faith in Dharma. I place my faith in Sangha. Place my faith in Sangha. And finally in Japanese, we're a Japanese American Buddhist temple. Namo kie butsu. And repeat. Namo kie butsu. listen. Namo kie ho. And repeat. Namo kie ho. Namo kie so. Repeat. Namo kie so. And then within this Jodo Shinshu temple, we'll complete it by reciting the name of Abhina Buddha. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadabs, Namadabs, Namadabs. So thanks for that. We love that chant. I think that I went to a variant in the Three Treasures. More common, I think, in the service book, it's I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. But regardless, it's effective, especially if you realize that it was written over 2,500 years ago. In the life of the Buddha, we believe that the same things were chanted. We even believe that the tune that comes down to us is the same tune that they used. Some of you may know Theravadan monks have a slightly different way of chanting as well. It's a little bit quicker, and the tune is slightly different. But even so, this ties us to the beginnings of early Buddhism. So I should go ahead and just tell you that when I'm talking about the Buddha, in this case, unless I make any other modifications or use different adjectives, I am talking about the historical Buddha. We use that phrase, the historical Buddha, because many Mahayana sects look to a cosmic or universal Buddha that is, from an outside view, a Western view, symbolizes or embodies the concepts of the approach to Buddhism that we tend to follow. And it is sometimes confusing to people because in those Mahayana sects we'll talk about the Buddha, and very often we're talking about the teachings that relate to Amida Buddha, who is the Buddha whose name we were reciting. But it's not confusing to folks within the tradition. We're taught that the real purpose of the historical Buddha was to teach us about that particular Buddha. Now, the sutras talk about a lot of different universal Buddhas, so I do want to go ahead and offer that daylight if you look at Buddhism from the outside. But for us, it's so important to us that is the way that we, what's the right word, reify the importance of Amida Buddha in our tradition, to say that the historical Buddha's sole purpose was to teach us about that particular Buddha. And yet, there is commonality between the two, and when we talk about the Buddha, there is a tradition that Amida Buddha embodies all of the teachings of Shakyamuni Gautama Buddha. Most of you know the history. Born Siddhartha Gautama as a sort of prince, certainly royalty in a republic in what is now Nepal. If anybody asks you where the Buddha was born, chances are they're from Nepal. And they want to make sure you're going to answer right, that they were born in Nepal. But you often hear people say Shakyamuni Buddha, that is, Siddhartha Gautama was born in the Shakya clan, so the clan of the Shakyas, or sometimes Gautama Buddha, the family name of Gautama. The family name Gautama, by the way, we don't talk about this that much. I think I learned it later. We don't talk about it that much in sermons and things, but it actually does mean holy cow. And it shows the Vedic and Hindu backgrounds of the historical Buddha. The historical Buddha had a lot of good content to work with when he went on his spiritual quest, because he had inherited, he had fine teachers, he had inherited quite a bit of the Vedic literature and Hindu literature, so many of the parables that come to us from Buddhism also originate in Vedic or Hinduistic literature. It doesn't change their importance to us, but it's just an interesting thing to note. So I wanted to identify the early teachings of the Buddha. We have 3 sessions where we'll be going through some of the first teachings. Many of you know that upon the Buddha's enlightenment in the deer park at Benares under a kind of fig tree now called the Ficus religiosa. He achieved awakening and eventually realized that he needed to share these with some of the fellow monastics or ascetics that he had been practicing with before he went off on his solo quest. And the first discussion he had with the people who he'd been working with previously is called the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. So it's the first time that Buddhist Dharma was shared and expounded upon. And it was quite remarkable to the now Buddha's fellow colleagues who had studied together with him earlier in terms of these spiritual insights. Those insights form the basis of what, not just what we'll be talking about in this and future sessions, but also all Buddhist sects. So again, this is the trunk of the tree for which our particular sect in San Diego is just a flower on a branch of that big tree. The two teachings I wanted to focus on today, though, predate that address. They predate the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. One of them, I mentioned the Buddha's great debt to the world's great religions as they existed before that, was AHIMSA, which is no harm, or non-violence, no harming. This was a prominent feature in Vedic and Hindu literature. It's a prominent feature in Jain literature, Jain, if some of you are familiar with that. Jain is eerily familiar to Buddhism in some respects. So if you were a kid reading Superman comics in the day and you ever saw Bizarro World, where things were kind of like they were in the metropolis of Superman myth, but very twisted or just a little bit strange, it's a little bit like that. But you'll see that even the emphasis on the teacher, the teachings, and the followers is very similar to Buddhism. There's many similar rituals. But let's talk about that for a minute. That's so important. First, do no harm. We know that phrase a little bit from some translations of the Hippocratic Oath, which dates back some 2,400 years or so. And the oath is given to the god Apollo, but it's considered today to be the cornerstone of modern medical ethics. What the physician is vowing to do to be a benign influence upon the patient. And it contains a note of humility that I have to be careful. First, do no harm. And from a spiritual point of view, I just wanted to point out that it means first do no harm to yourself either. So some of you may know that before he became awakened, the Buddha was involved in some very severe ascetic practices, very hard yoga, if you will, extreme yoga. And at some point he came to a decision that he needed to change that way of developing his own spirituality, if you will. That way is the second teaching that predates the Enlightenment, because the Buddha didn't become enlightened until after he made this decision and this discovery. It may have been announced and promoted in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. But the middle way is such a powerful Buddhist teaching that has great applications for our everyday lives. And you can think of it in various ways, but I should tell you the background story, which is that the Buddha, upon spending weeks and months of the most extreme practices, trying to deprive himself of any comfort, living just off on a few grains of rice, or the sutras say the drops of dew on the leaves in the morning, pushing himself as far as he could, realized that if he continued, he would die and not achieve his goal. And dejected, he sat by a watering hole where a young woman took her family yak or water buffalo to be watered, and saw this poor wretch. She actually thought maybe he was a spirit because he looked so emaciated and almost non-human. But she decided that it was just a human being and starving, so she offered him some rice gruel. Doesn't sound much to us, but I'm sure that it included some nuts and some raisins, maybe like the rice pudding you sometimes get in Indian restaurants, perhaps sweetened. But the Buddha ate that and was so refreshed, he was so grateful, that he determined thereafter to treat food as medicine, that he would take enough food to keep his body whole and healthy. And that turned out to be something that we still consider extreme. That is, he ate one meal a day. He ate his one meal before noon, and the other practice that he encouraged other monks to follow in his time was not to drink any water until the next morning. So it's a little bit of a extreme approach from our soft side. None of us would willingly or enthusiastically embrace that approach, but many monastics do, even to this day. But the middle path has great applications because it is not just that moderation in all things. That was the Western wisdom of the playwright Moliere. It is sort of like the motto at the end of one of his great plays, moderation in all things, to avoid extreme behaviors. Well, even that's great, but what is revolutionary about the Buddha is that he lived in a time where you could do A or B. You could go ahead and be a prince, or you could go ahead and be a monastic, renounce the world, renounce all your earthly wealth and trappings. The Buddha's insight was that it's not between A and B. If we're still using the alphabet, it's between A and Z. But there's actually an infinite number of choices we can have for the direction of our lives. So if you ever find yourself hung up on feeling like you have to do one or the other of two things and you don't like either one, keep thinking. Maybe you can discover a pathway where you partake of some benefits of one of the two paths and some benefits of the other. It's a very freeing philosophy. It's such a deep philosophy that actually Buddhism was not known as Buddhism for centuries. The West likes to go ahead and put an ism or IST at the end of something, but in Asia for centuries it was known as the middle way. If you wanted to talk about the Buddha's teachings, it was the middle way. And the middle way has been expanded in many different directions. Just on the direction of time, it's a reminder to those of us that it's probably better to dwell in the present moment. That is, in the middle between the past and the future. The past that we can't change, the future that we can't see. If we want to be effective in our lives, be alive in the present moment. So it really is a great teaching. And it's always impressed me, but not often remarked on, that it was something the Buddha came up with pre-awakening, pre-enlightenment. So those are two of the basic teachings of Buddhism. I did want to go ahead and talk a little bit about non-harming. Sometimes people complain. I also, some of you have spent time in Zen meditation. I started off as a college student going to sittings, never a great exemplar. I did go to some sesshin where there was long periods of sitting, but what I would hear other practitioners talk about is either what they were missing, they weren't getting the results that they wanted, or they were obsessed about their practice in terms of trying to get something. And we have similar discussions sometimes about the fact here in our tradition where that recitation of Amida Buddha's name is important, that, well, you know, you're not doing anything. Or we're often told in our tradition that the biggest thing that we can do is to listen to the Dharma. In other words, just sit there. But in both cases, you're just sitting there, whether it's Zen or Jodo Shinshu, and this is important. You're not harming. There's no harm. You're existing in a benign environment. You're allowing your mind to be benign. You've set aside all of your worldly woes. And to be a Buddhist does not mean those go away. Well, I don't know how famous the Lama is, but it was one of the Lamas who is popular in Italy once said that you always have problems. That's the truth of Buddhism. If you have a dog, you've got dog problems. If you've got a house, you've got house problems. If you have a spouse, you have spouse problems. That's life. Now, how you respond to that, what you do with that, is probably more important than whether or not you have problems. But I did want to speak against a misconception that some folks have, sometimes reading early texts that make it sound like the goal of being awakened is not be bothered by anything, not to feel anything. So sometimes, we'll talk more about the Four Noble Truths next week, but sometimes the idea being that, well, I should go ahead and not be bothered. I should be above that. I should not have emotions. I should not attach to things. And the actual practice of Buddhism is somewhat different. Even in Thich Nhat Hanh's book about the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the heart of the I think it's the heart of the Buddha Dharma. He says that the Buddha continued to suffer like the rest of us because he had compassion. He could not suffer. So it's not the case that to become a Buddha is to become a steel ball bearing where, you know, nothing affects you. But it is to go ahead and transform that suffering into something positive. To go ahead and try and identify the source of the suffering, understand it, and perhaps learn more about yourself, perhaps be more able to understand the behavior of the people around us. And at this point, I'm backing into what I wanted to say about karma, and that is that it matters. The things we say, the things we think, the things we say, and the things we do. And there is a karmic link that the Buddha talked about in a number of sutras between thought, speech, and action. So you don't have to force yourself to think happy thoughts, but if you start thinking negative thoughts, instead of just accepting those thoughts, you may want to take a moment at that time, or perhaps later if you are in the middle of something, and try and figure it out. Well, why is that? Why do I have this negative reaction? And you may get to a point where you work through that negative reaction and decide there may be a better way to respond to it than just thinking it's bad and that person is inferior or morally derelict or whatever negative connotation you want to have. A more compassionate approach would be, well, that maybe there's a reason why that person's acting out. And maybe you can even determine what the reason might be. But at a minimum, you're not just thinking bad things about that person. Because maybe you've seen this among friends where somebody belies the fact they have judgmental feelings or negative feelings about somebody in what they say. That is, it slips out because they've been thinking, oh, that's so-and-so. And then suddenly, without thinking, they find themselves giving a jab. Verbal jab at that other person. Or maybe worse, you've been around friends, where somebody's talking back at somebody and always on their case and finally acts out physically. It's a progression that the Buddha saw, and I think clearly, that there's a connection between thought, speech, and action. So in the liturgy that we use, we have one recitation where we even talk about that. I will think pure and beautiful thoughts. I will say pure and beautiful words. I will do pure and beautiful deeds. Not that by saying that makes it magic and suddenly everything we think, say, or do is pure and beautiful, but it's an aspiration. And having made the aspiration, it's a present resource to us to try and monitor who we are and how we act in the world. So I think that if you're okay with it, I'd like to do the breathing exercise one more time, and then we'll have a chance for a discussion. Because this is being recorded, we're not going to have someone come up to a mic and be videographed, but I'll go ahead and repeat the question just so it's recorded for those folks watching by live stream or who watch this later. So, but right now, go ahead once again, get comfortable where you are, take a nice deep breath. Inhale just a little extra, and exhale completely. Another nice deep breath. Exhale completely. Please continue for a few more times. And so in keeping with this space, which is a Jodo Shinshu temple, please, if you wish, put your hands together in Gassho and repeat after me one of Buddha's many names. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandab, Samandab, Samandab, Samandab. So at this time, folks have comments or questions. We certainly have time to do that. And then we also, afterwards, there's very light refreshments downstairs if you'd like to join and continue that conversation. So any questions or comments? Please. Okay, it was an excellent question about the similarities and differentiations between the historical Buddha and Amida Buddha, who is one of the mythical Buddhas for us. The long answer, I got to do a better job. The short answer is that they are different. And yet there is a connectivity that is important to us. So instead of us, we touch on the basic Buddha teachings, the early teachings of the Buddha. We do the Vandana Tisarana in our services, for example, but more often we're focused on aspects of some of the later Mahayana sutras that talk about Amida Buddha in depth. And many of our minister's assistants are quite scholarly and are studying those works even now. And we have, she's on medical leave, but we have one reverend who has reached, she's still a volunteer here. She's not prepared to be a resident minister, but she has the highest ordination in our tradition. And then we have two people who are going, we only have two levels of ordination in our tradition. The first level is being aspired to by two more minister's assistants. And the study that they do is not insignificant. And then we have 2 more who are in preparations for a year from now, perhaps, attempting to receive that more scholarly ordination, or at least certainly more learned ordination. But the main thing that I think that we can talk about at a street level is that what good does it do you? There are teachings in our tradition that are especially helpful, that are not part of the original teachings of the historical Buddha, but come out of them. So from one point of view, all of Mahayana Buddhism, which, as you know, there are many sutras that talk about different universal Buddhas as a way to help us understand what ultimate reality is. The ultimate reality is not what we read. It's a pointer. It's the finger pointing to the hazy moon of enlightenment. And so instead of looking at the finger, we're being encouraged by those deep texts to look at that moon. But the practices in our tradition are very low-key, very accessible to everyone. And we benefit from that. I have to admit that the first turning of the wheel of Dharma was not addressed to people like you and me. It was addressed to folks who were long entrenched ascetics, who had been spending every waking moment following a spiritual path. And later on, the Buddha talked to a lot of ordinary folks, but very little of that gets recorded. All of the good stuff of the Buddha that got recorded was recorded by one of the monks or the monastics, because it was an oral tradition for over 200 years. And that's why we don't have a red letter edition of any of the sutras, because it's all been an oral tradition. It's a giant game of telephone across generations. And yet something of value, something of spirit comes through those sutras that can be inspiring. There is a myth, there is a story I won't get into now about Amida Buddha. But he's given a story just like the historical Buddha, where he started off as one thing, in Amida's case, in the sutras, a king, and decided to become a Buddha himself, and went through remarkable, impossible activities to get there. So the question is not, was there a person named Amida Buddha? It's a concept. Did he go ahead and do X, Y, and Z? No, we're looking at the finger, we're not looking at the moon. It's what the meaning behind the sutra. So that's a very common approach. And this is just me speaking. This is not a position of the Buddhist Temple of San Diego. But I think that it's fairly well accepted that the Mahayana Sutras are meant as teaching tools, not as history. As far as the distinguishing goes, it is convenient for us to simply conceptualize that the wisdom and compassion of the original Buddha is well embodied in Amida Buddha. And that's satisfactory. And if people are interested, they can go ahead and study the early Buddhist text. If they're interested, they can study the Mahayana Sutras. Very strange in some ways. The realm of enlightenment is called the Pure Land in this tradition. We're a Pure Land tradition, which in Mahayana Buddhism means that we focus on Amida Buddha. And it's described in psychedelic detail. Lotuses made of rubies 3 miles high. Okay, all right. So we're meant to be inspired by those things, not necessarily, we don't have to become defenders of the historical accuracy of the description of the Pure Land. So I think for most folks it's just convenient. But it is interesting to go back to the early Buddhist teachings, because it raises some really great questions. And certainly that was a very good question, so thank you for that. Any other questions? Well, I did include a bonus round when I sent out the email about this particular session. That bonus round uses most of the words of bonus, is bombu. And this is something that's fairly specific to our tradition and because it's so much in the foreground. In the earlier teachings of the Buddha, they talk about the ignorant person, the fool. In our tradition, we recognize that we're all bombu. It's a very leveling application of the term. I'm not better than you. I'm a bombu. You know, you're not inferior to me. I'm a bombu. And it creates a kind of humility that works in our understanding to further reduce the holds of the ego. It doesn't mean we become egoless, but maybe we get a little wise to the fact and we're not so full of ourselves. And that's a good thing. And maybe, you know, after a couple of years, we're even less full of ourselves. The concept is that we gain wisdom and compassion when we are not worried about ourselves. If we can go ahead and think about other people more, or if we can be grateful for what we have. I mentioned Kenji Sensei and a couple of his practices, and someone asked me to go ahead and mention just a few of them. But Kenji Sensei once said, well, every time you get up in the morning, find something beautiful and enjoy it and look at it and then express your gratitude by, in our tradition, reciting the Nembutsu, that is, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. And some folks did that and found great results. He would also tell folks, if you get at a red light and get upset because you're being, you know, kept from your forward momentum where you want to go, you've got some things to do. Instead, be grateful. Well, this is what keeps us from running into each other. And the other people who have things to do, places to be, are able to get there safely as well. So you'll never go wrong driving if your goal is to make sure everybody gets there safely. You might get into trouble if you want to get there early, or get there in a way that could put you in a spot where you're not being as safe as you might be. So you had raised your hand. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have a question. I was wondering if there's a connection between your founders and kind of what you talk about, like happiness every day, and like very positive teachings about the importance of joy. Does it feng shui at all with the teaching of it? Or they talk about this connection between getting your environment to spark joy and how that can create happiness? Is that talked about?
Well, that's another great question. The short answer is no, it's not talked about. But the question had to do with Marie Kondo, who achieved great popularity maybe even 10 years ago or so. But she encouraged people to only keep those things that gave them joy. I'm simplifying, but it was a way of decluttering that had a kind of aesthetic and spiritual component. And I think she's spot on. Here's one of the things that she would do. And encourage folks to do is that when you get rid of your things, don't grumble and throw them out. You would thank them. You know, namadabs, namadabs. Thank you for this. Thank you for being a sweatshirt, you know, without complaint. Crazy in a way, but it is very dear to Japanese spirituality, and that is certainly within the encompass of Jodo Shinshu, in my personal view. But the other thing is that a lot of folks found her an object of ridicule because she would say, you know, only keep the books that delight you, you know, and things like that. But I want to let you know, it's not part of her common bio. She was a maiden at a Shinto shrine as a teenage girl. She has a very deep spiritual training. And some of you have seen the movie Spirited Away. I'm so sorry, senior moment, I'm forgetting the cartoonist, but world-renowned cartoonist. And yeah, Miyazaki. And that goes ahead and gives you a sense of not just Jodo Shinshu, Japanese Buddhism, but overall in Japan, a kind of acceptance of spirituality. that in another context might be looked down. We might look down our noses because that's animism. You know, how can we thank a sweatshirt? You know, how can we thank a stone? How can we thank a tree? But in our tradition, expressing gratitude is possible. And they no longer did it when Joyce and I went to Japan about a year and a half ago for a wonderful vacation. But the men and women who would pull the cart through to sell you drinks and bentos would always bow before they entered the cart. And then when they left, they would turn around and bow when they left the car train. It was really remarkable. The degree to which spirituality is woven into the fabric of Japanese society. I'm not saying that it's a perfect society, but it's of interest. Anyway, that's my take, but it's not the official Jodo Shinshu take on Marie Kondo. Yes? Yeah, the comment was that the comment was very wise, and it was that after Marie Kondo got married and had kids, she backed off of those philosophies because they were just too hard. If you're on your own, you have a lot more control over your environment, and you can go ahead and simplify. I always coming to mind are Western quotes that follow that, but I think this was a criticism of Ralph Waldo Emerson, you know, who in his novel he went off on his own and lived in a cabin away from society most of the time. And I wish I remembered who said this, but it was one of his contemporaries, that the problem of solitary living in that fashion is that you find yourself having discussions with a broom. So there's another case where a sort of approach that could seem extreme is probably not practical. If you're asking, okay, we're almost done, but since you asked about Jodo Shinshu, one of the major features that I would identify is just the communality. We like to do things together. We like having snacks. After a funeral, very often we'll get together for a big meal together. Remember the person who passed away, catch up on loved ones. And that also is a way in which remembering our commonality with others is also very healthy, we believe, spiritually, because again, it keeps us from being so full of ourselves, you know, and it also means that we enjoy things probably more, because we're not trying to get the absolute best food. We like food, we like decent food, and we're not picky, you know, so. Okay, well, this is way off topic, but thank you very much. At this time, I just wanted to check to see if there were any announcements people wanted to make. I can tell you about next week, we're going to go into what you might have expected this to be about, which are things like the Four Noble Truths and the Three Poisons, some of the numbered lists that are so important in Buddhism. Why numbered? Nothing was written down. So if you number, that's mnemonic. You can remember it. And the people's brains back in that time, just amazing. Some of you know that in the medieval period, in the so-called Dark Ages, they had a concept of a memory palace in which you visualized a palace in your mind, and you knew that what you wanted to find was in this particular chest of drawers in your palace, 3 drawers down. If you opened it up, you would find it. But learning is hard to maintain in your brain, but there was a period where knowledge was knowable in many fields. You might know everything. Now it all happens so fast, discoveries, etc., controversies. But getting back to the sutras, that's why we find so many numbered lists. It's just a good way to remember things. So the fourth and final session will be on, the third and final session will be on the Eightfold Noble Path and some other things. And we hope to continue to live stream these, but there's a chance that it won't be. So that's another encouragement to come in person if you can. So I appreciate that. I encourage you to offer incense if you'd like. Most of you know how to go ahead, but I can show some of you who don't. But first, let me just go ahead and close with Nembutsu. Thank you. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandab, Samadab, Samadab, Samadab. Thank you, everybody. Please feel free to offer incense, and we do have some light refreshments downstairs.